To my mother's memory. Title: History of Great Armenia. By Mobses of Xoren. Part 2. The Beginning. About the beginning, though I shall mention some of the later times and the famous men, where the divine scriptures concur, then I shall advance necessarily to pagan narratives, from which I will take what I consider reliable. G1-2. The descendants of Adam are listed, then the descendants of Noah chapters 4-5, G13. G1-8, then the descendants of Noah's son, Japheth, from whom the Armenians later claimed descent, with material not known elsewhere. 5. Yabet Japheth. Yabet fathered Gamer. Gamer fathered Tiras. Tiras fathered Tiargam. Tiargam fathered Hayek. Hayek fathered Aramanic. Aramanic fathered Aramias. Aramias fathered Amasia. Amasia fathered Gegam. Gegam fathered Harmai. Harmai fathered Aram. Aram fathered Ara the handsome. G19. 6. Regarding the fact that the accounts of other antiquarians sometimes agree with Patriarch and Prophet Moses, i.e., with the Old Testament accounts, and sometimes disagree, and about the ancient unwritten stories of the philosopher Olympiodorus. Classical Armenian text at Internet Archive. 6. We have presented the genealogy of the three sons of Noah down to Abraham, Ninus, and Aram, selecting, as far as possible, what is reliable from many narratives. I believe that no thinking person will object to this, except someone who, intending to violate the correct order, would prefer fables to the true accounts. In such cases, everyone is free to amuse himself as he pleases. But if you are grateful for our labors and efforts, O you lover of knowledge and patron of our labors, in a few words I shall briefly recapitulate what I set out above, how the first storytellers were pleased to write on this matter as romances, although I am not now able to say whether such materials were found in this fabulous form in the archives of the kings, or whether each one of the authors enjoyed changing the names and the stories and the times as he chose, or if there were some other reasons for the discrepancies. But as for accounts about the beginning, i.e., creation, sometimes they tell the truth, sometimes they lie. For example, just as they call the first created being not the first man, G22, but the first king, so they give him a barbarous name, attributing to him a life of 36,000 years. Yet when it comes to the number of the patriarchs and the mention of the flood, they concur and agree with Moses. Similarly, when describing events after the flood, they erroneously list three famous men before the building of the tower, yet after the voyage of Xoren to Armenia, they are correct, but in changing the names and in many other things they lie. But now, I shall be happy to begin my account based on the words of my Sibyl, Berosus, who was more accurate than most of the other antiquarians. Berosus says that before construction of the tower and before the human race became multilingual, and also following the sea voyage of Xoren to Armenia, the rulers of the world were Xoren, Titan, and Yapitosti. These, it seems to me, correspond to Sem, Ham, and Japheth in Genesis in the Old Testament. Berosus continues, when they had divided up the world under their rule, Xoren grew stronger and ruled over the other two, Zeratusht, Amagus, Mog, and king of the Bactrians, who are the Medes, said that Xoren is the father of the gods. Zeratusht said many other things about him of a fabulous nature, which would be inappropriate for us to repeat now. G23. Berosus says, when Xoren had become a tyrant, Titan and Yapitosti opposed him in battle, since he planned to establish his sons as kings over everyone. In this confusion, Titan seized a part of the territory allotted to Xoren. Then their sister, Astgek, convinced them to stop the conflict. Titan and Yapitosti consented to Xoren reigning as king, but made a sworn treaty between them to kill all the sons born to Xoren, so that they would not rule over them as a hereditary family. Thus, they designated strong men from the Titans to observe the births of the children of Xoren's women. They had slain 2 of the children to keep the sworn agreement in force, when their sister, Astgik with Xoren's women, convinced some of the Titans to let the other offspring live, and, instead of killing them, sending them to the west, to the mountain once called Ditsankts, and now called Olympus. Now, whether some consider these accounts to be fables, or to be the truth, I myself am convinced that there is much truth here. G24. We must repeat, though in an extremely abbreviated manner, certain old unwritten narratives which were told in the old days among the Greek sages and which have come down to us through the writings of persons named Gorgias and Benon, and another, a third writer, a certain David. One of them, versed in philosophy, said this: O elders! When I was in Greece and was studying philosophy, it once happened that among wise and experienced men, the discussion had turned to matters of historical geography and the division of peoples into nations. Stories found in books were interpreted, some in one way, others in a different way. But the most accomplished man among them, who was named Olympiodorus, said this: I will narrate to you unwritten tales that have come down to us by tradition and that many villagers repeat to this day. There is a book about Xisuttare and his G25 sons which now cannot be found anywhere, in which, they say, the following account appears. After the voyage of Xisuttare to Armenia, and after he encountered dry land, one of his sons, named Sem, went to examine the land to the northwest. Finding a small plain near a mountain with an elongated base, with a river crossing it, which flowed towards Assyria, Sem remained there for 2 lunar months. He named the mountain Sim, after his own name, and then returned to the southeast from where he had come. One of Sem's youngest sons, named Tarban, with 30 of his brothers and 15 sisters along with their husbands, left his father and settled by the same riverbank, from whose name he called the district Tehran. He called the name of the place where he had dwelled Throenke, since it was there that the initial separation of Sem's sons from him had occurred. They also say that he resided for a few days on the borders of Bactria, leaving one of his sons there. The eastern areas of Sim, they call Xoren, and to this day the district is called Xoren. G26. Very often the old descendants of Aram mention such things in fabulous songs, ballads, sung to the accompaniment of the piand or stringed instrument, with performances and dances. Whether these tales are true or false does not concern us. After all, in this book I will cite everything in full, both what is oral and what is written in books, so that you will know everything and will be convinced of my sincerity towards you. 7. Brief discussion of the fact that the one called Bel by secular authors is in truth Nebrov, Nimrod of the Holy Scriptures. Classical Armenian text at Internet Archive. 7. Many authors say many things which differ from each other on the topic of Bel, during whose time our ancestor Hayek lived. But I say that the one called Cronus is the same as Bel Nimrod. The Egyptians arrange their order in the same way as the patriarch Moses does, namely, Hephaestus, the son, Cronus who is Ham, Cush, and Nimrod, leaving out Mesraim. For they say that Hephaestus was the first man and the inventor of fire. Why? It is that Hephaestus discovered fire, or how Prometheus stole the divine fire and gave it as a gift to humankind, which is an allegory, does not belong. G27 in the order of our narration. The order of the Egyptian dynasties, and the sum of the years from the dynasty of the shepherd kings to Hephaestus, coincide with what was noted among the Hebrews, from the time of Joseph to Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Let this much be sufficient on this matter. For if we undertake to explain to you in our History everything that has happened from the time of the building of the tower to our own days. Then when will we get to the historical narratives that you particularly want? This is especially the case, since the work ahead of us is already long and the lifespan of mortals is short and unknowable. So then, I now shall begin to show you information about our own history, where the material came from, and more about it. 8. Who found these stories and where they came from? They say that Arshak the Great, king of the Persians and Parthians, who himself was of Parthian origin, rebelled from the Macedonians and ruled as king over the entire East and the Assyrians. In Nineveh he killed the Seleucid king Antiochus, and subjugated the entire world to his rule. He set up his brother, Vaurshak, to rule as king over the land of the Armenians, considering that this would be an appropriate way of making his own rule unshakable. Arshak gave to Vaurshak the city of Nisibis as his capital and G28 and allocated his borders to include part of western Syria, Palestine, Asia, all of the Middle Lands Asia Minor, Anatolia, from the Pontic Sea to the area where the Caucasus runs into the Western Sea Caspian Sea. This included Atropataucan and as far as your thoughts and bravery can reach, because the borders of the brave, he said, are determined by their swords as much as they can take and hold. When Vaurshak had thoroughly put in order his own principality and had established his reign, he desired to know who and what kind of men had ruled over the land of the Armenians up to his time, whether in the past the place he occupied had belonged to the brave or the cowardly. Having found a certain Assyrian man named Mar-Lord-Abbas Katina, a man learned and skilled in Chaldean and Greek writing, Vaurshak sent him to his brother, Arshak the Great, with fitting gifts so that Arshak would open the royal divan for Mar-Abbas. Vaurshak wrote to him a letter with this content. 9. Letter of Vaurshak, king of the Armenians, to Arshak the Great, king of the Persians. Classical Armenian text at Internet Archive. 9. To Arshak, king of earth and sea, whose person and image resemble those of our gods, whose glory and destiny are loftier than those of all kings, and whose breadth of mind resembles that of the sky above the earth, from Vaurshak your younger brother and comrade, established by you as king of the Armenians, be well in all triumph. G29. Since I received a command from you to concern myself with valor and with all knowledge, I have never ceased doing what you advised. Rather, I have seen to all of these, to the extent that my intellect and comprehension permit. Now that my kingdom has been put into order, through your concern, I have a mind to learn who ruled the land of the Armenians before me, where the lordships which are here originated from. 4. There is no apparent order to the lordships here, nor information about the worship in the temples, nothing about who was the first and who was the last in rank. Nothing seems to be in order here, rather, everything is confused and wild. Consequently, I beg your lordship to order that the royal divan be opened to the man Mar-Abbas who has come before your mighty lordship, so that finding the information sought for by your brother and son, he may bring it back swiftly. I well know that the pleasure we shall receive from the fulfillment of our wishes, will be a source of joy for you. Be well, O eminent one, who dwells among the gods. When Arshak the Great received the letter from the hand of Mar-Abbas Katina, with great deliberation he ordered that the royal divan in Nineveh be made available to him. King Arshak also was delighted that such a thought had arisen in his brother, to whom he had entrusted half his kingdom. Having looked through all the books, Mar-Abbas found a book written in Greek, which had this title G30. Beginning of the book. This book, which contains authentic information about native antiquities and about the ancestors, was translated from Chaldean into Greek, at the order of Alexander. The beginning of the book, he says, deals with Xoren, Titan, and Yapitosti, and in it, the descendants of these three men, the progenitors, who were all renowned men, were arranged in order, each in his place, for many years. From this book, Mobses Katina extracted the authentic history of only our people and delivered it to King Vaurshak in Nisibis, in the Greek and Assyrian languages. The attractive and valiant Vaurshak, expert at the bow, eloquent, and intelligent, received it, and regarding it as the first among his treasures, placed it in a repository in the palace with great care, and a part of it he ordered to be inscribed on a monument. Through this we have confirmed the order of our tales and repeat them now for your curiosity, extending our ancestral lordships as far back as Sardanapalus of the Chaldeans and even farther back. In this book the account begins as follows. Fearsome and majestic were the first gods, and they were the cause of very great benefits to the world, creating it and making it full of people. A race of giants separated from them, monstrous creatures, who were huge of body. Seeped in impiety, they hatched out an impious G31 plan, to build the Tower of Babylon. They were engaged in that very task when a ferocious and divine wind aroused by the anger of the gods pulled apart the construction. The gods also divided people, by making languages unintelligible to one another and hurled humanity into noisy confusion. One of those giants was Hayak, the descendant of Yapitosti, a renowned and courageous lord, Nagzarer, strong and accurate in drawing the bow. But let us finish with the present arrangement or train of this narration. Because our goal here is not to tell the story in its entirety, but to try to show our first and most ancient ancestors. So, let me start to narrate from this same book, Yapitosti, Marad, Sarat, Taklad who are Japheth, Gomer, Tiras, and Tirgam. After this, the same chronicler continues, Hayak, Aramanic, and the others in order, whom we mentioned earlier. 10. About the rebellion of Hayak. Classical Armenian text at Internet Archive, 10. This Hayak says Mobses Katina was handsome, strong, and personable, with curly hair and bright eyes. Among the giants he was valiant and prominent, resisting all who would evilly turn their hand to absolute rule over all the giants and divine heroes. He scornfully raised his hand against the tyranny of Bel, during the spreading of the human race throughout the breadth of all the world, in the midst of incredibly G32 foolish and mighty giants. Since everyone there had become frenzied and was trying to kill his own comrade with the sword, and trying to rule over one another, during these events Bel arose to tyrannize over the entire country. But Hayak refused to submit to him, and after the birth of his son, Aramanic, in Babylon, Hayak picked up and went to the Ararid country, to the north, accompanied by his sons and daughters, and the sons of his sons, powerful men, numbering about 300, and others, domestic servants and others who had come to join him, with all their bags and baggage. Hayak went and dwelt at the foot of a mountain in a plain where a few people from a previous dispersion had settled and were living. Hayak subjected them to himself and then built a place of residence, a property which he gave as inheritance to Aramanic's son, Cadmus. This information confirms what is said in the ancient unwritten tales. And then Mobses Katina says, Hayak with his folk went to the northwest and dwelled in a certain highland plain, naming the area Hark, meaning that the fathers from the clan of the house of Torgam had dwelled there. He also built a village, naming it Hakashayan after himself. Mobses Katina notes in the same history, that living in an area to the south of this plain, at the foot of a mountain with a long base, there were a few people from earlier times, who voluntarily submitted to the divine hero. This, too, verifies the unwritten tales mentioned earlier G33. 11. About the war and the death of Bel. Classical Armenian text at Internet Archive, 11. Continuing his narration, Marabas Katina says that when the Titan Bel had established his dominion over everyone, he sent one of his sons, with trusted men, to the northern areas, to bring Hayek into obedience so that they would live in peace. You have settled, Bel said, in an icy cold land. Now warm and melt the freezing cold of your prideful nature and, submitting to me, live in peace wherever it pleases you to settle in my country. However, Hayek sent back Bel's envoys with a harsh response. The messenger, Bel's son, returned to Babylon. Then the Titan Bel assembled troops against him, and came with a mass of foot soldiers. Arriving in the north, in the country of Irott, close to Cadmus' home, Cadmus fled to Hayek, sending swift runners before him with this message: Know, O great one among the divine heroes, that Bel is coming against you with immortal braves, and with giants of combat whose stature reaches the sky. When I learned that they were close to my house, I fled and am coming in panic. Now hurry and think what you will do. Meanwhile Bel advanced impetuously like a strong torrent pouring down from a height, with the unstoppable and huge force of his entourage, and reached the borders of Hayek's domain, placing confidence in the courage and physical strength G34 of his mighty men. Here Hayek, an intelligent and wise giant with curly hair and sparkling eyes, hurried and assembled his sons and grandsons, brave men and fine bowmen, but extremely few in number, as well as others under his command. He came to the edge of a lake whose waters are salty and which contains small fish. Summoning his army, he said to them, as we go against Bel's host, let us try to reach the spot where Bel is surrounded by his braves. Either we will die and our folk will go into the service of Bel, or else we will show him the dexterity of our fingers and, having dispersed the mob of them, we will achieve victory. Advancing many stadia, they came to a plain located between the highest mountains and halted there in an elevated spot to the right of streams of water. Looking up they saw the disordered multitude of Bel's host scattered in brazen array and swarming over the face of the country. As for Bel, he stood indifferent and unperturbed, like a watchtower, with his vast host positioned to the left of the water on a hill. Hayek recognized among this group the armed band with which Bel had advanced to the head of the troops, surrounded by a few chosen armed men, and there was a wide distance between Bel and his main forces. Bel wore an iron helmet with distinctive plumes, and plates of bronze over his back G35 and chest, armor covered his legs and arms, a belt circled his waist. From his left side hanged a double-edged sword. An enormous spear was in his right hand, and in the left, a shield. Select troops were to his right and left. When Hayek saw the Titan Bel so strongly armed and with select men on his right and left sides, he deployed Armenia and his two brothers on his own right, and placed Cadmus with two other sons on his left. Because they were very competent with bow and sword, Hayek himself was in the front. He arranged his troops to the rear in the shape of a triangle, and then slowly moved forward. The giants from both sides approached each other, and a terrible roar sounded over the earth when they clashed. By the fierceness of their assaults, the giants brought fear upon each other. It was there that some gigantic men on both sides met the edge of the sword, and rolled to the ground, dead. Yet the outcome of the battle remained undecided. When Bel, king of the Titans, saw this unexpected development and doubtful state of affairs, he was terrified and, turning back, began to ascend the same hill which he had just descended. He hoped to fortify himself in the midst of his host until the entire army arrived and he could restore his battle line. Realizing this, Hayek the archer advanced toward the king, pulled tight the wide-arched bow, and let fly a three-pronged arrow, which hit Bel's breastplate. That arrow, having passed through Bel's back, fell out onto the ground. And here the arrogant Titan, falling to the ground, breathed out G36 his spirit. When the host witnessed such an awesome act of bravery, each man fled where he could. On this matter, let this much be enough. On the site of the battle, Hayek established a settlement, Dastakert, estate, domain, and named it Hayek, because of the victory in battle. For that reason, even the district to this day is called Valley of the Armenians, Hayetzer. As for the hill where Bel fell with his warriors, Hayek named that Gerisman's cemetery. Today it is called Gerismanak. Mobses Katina says that Hayek ordered that Bel's corpse be embalmed with drugs, taken to Hark and buried in an elevated spot, in the view of his wives and sons. Our land is called Hayek after the name of our ancestor Hayek. 12. About the clans and generations descending from Hayek, and what each of them did. Classical Armenian text at Internet Archive, 12. Following this, much else is related in that book. However, we shall take from it only what serves for our compilation. Mobses Katina says that after this, Hayek returned to his same dwelling place. He gave as gifts to his grandson, Cadmus, much booty from the war, and many renowned people from his own entourage. Hayek ordered him to hold his first home in his former dwelling place. Then he himself went and stayed in the plain called Hark, for a few years. Now we mentioned earlier that Hayek had fathered Armenic G37 in Babylon. Hayek died after living not a few years, i.e., after a long life, and entrusted the entire clan to his son, Armenic. Now Armenic left two of his brothers Xoren and Manawaz, with all their entourages, in the place called Hark, and he left there also Baz, who was Manawaz's son. Of these brothers, Manawaz inherited Hark, while his son, Baz, inherited the shore of the Salt Sea to the northwest. He called the district and the sea by his own name. They say that it is from him that descend the heads of families, Nahapetutins, named Manawaziank, Psnunik, and Orduni, which, they say, destroyed each other in battle after the time of Saint Terdat. Xor multiplied in the northern area and established his cultivated areas here. Mobses Katina says that it is from him that the great Nagzararutin, lordship, of the Xor Uni clan derives brave, renowned men as our folk from this clan today. Prominent among us, Armenic took his entire multitude and went to the northeast, descending into a deep plain which was surrounded by the lofty summits of mountains, and crossed by a murmuring river flowing from the west. The eastern plain is, as it were, lying back, extending toward the direction of the sunrise. At the foot of the mountains G38 there gush many clear streams which merge into gentle rivers. At their borders, at the base of the mountains and edges of the plain, they almost seemed like some young lads walking about with young girls. And there was a southern mountain, pointed toward the sun, with a snow-white peak which rose gradually up from the ground, becoming a steep top. Indeed, this was an old man of a mountain among the younger ones, and a wide mountain which, as one of our countrymen said, was a 3-day journey for a well-girded man to walk around. Armenic dwelled in the depths of this plain and also cultivated a part of the plain in the north and the foot of the mountain on the same side. He named the mountain Aragats, after his own name, and his property he named Aragatsatun, foot of Aragats. Now the historian relates this wonderful information, that in many places in our country, the Haykids found a few scattered men dwelling here and there, people who were resident there before the arrival of our native ancestor Hayek. Armenic, having lived some years, fathered Aramias, and then died after living many years. His son, Aramias, built his dwelling on a hill by the bank of a river, and named it Armair. As for the river, he named it Irott after his grandson, Irott. And his son, Xoren, who had many children and was a big eater, he sent G39 with all his entourage to a nearby plain which was rich and fertile where not a few streams flowed on the northern flank of the mountain called Irott. It is said that the district of Xoren is named after him. Thus it seems that the proverb which circulates among the villagers is justified: you may have the throat of Xoren, but we do not have the granaries of Xoren. This Armenius lived some years and fathered a son, Amasia. Then Armenius died, after living some more years. Amasia dwelt in Armenia. After some years he fathered Gegum, and after Gegum, the valiant Parox and Tzolok. After fathering them, he crossed the river near the southern mountain and built there by the caves at the foot of the mountain 2 houses at great expense, one to the east near the sources of the springs that emerge from the base of the mountain, and the other to the west of this dwelling, distant about half a long day's journey for a man on foot. Amasia gave these in inheritance to his 2 sons, the valiant Parox and the swift Tzolok. The latter dwelt in them and named the places after themselves, Paraxot from Parox, and Tzolakert from Tzolok. Amasia named the mountain Mobses after himself, and then he returned to Armenia. Having lived a few years longer, he died. Gegum, after the passage of some years, became the father of Harmony, in Armenia. G40. Then Gegum left Harmony in Armenia to dwell with his sons, and he himself went to the northeast around another mountain, to the shore of a lake. He cultivated a place by the shore of the lake, and left inhabitants there. After his own name, he called the mountain Geg, the cultivated place Gegarkuni, and also the lake Gegarkuni Sevan. It was here that Gegum fathered his son, Sisak, an exalted, personable, handsome, eloquent man, and an excellent archer. It was to Sisak that Gegum gave most of his property and many of his personal servants. He set the borders of his inheritance extending from the lake in the east to a plain where the river Araxes cuts through the mountain's caves, flows through the long and narrow gorges, and with an awesome roar descends to the plain. Here is where Sisak dwelt, and he filled the boundaries of his habitation with cultivation. He called that land Sinik, after his own name. However, the Persians more accurately call it Sisakan. Varush, the first Parthian king of the Armenians, found here his Sisak's descendants, renowned men, whom he designated as lords of the land, from the line of Sisakan. That Varush did this is confirmed by the history, but how it occurred we will narrate in the proper place. Gegum returned again to the same plain, and at the foot of the same mountain Gegin, a small secure valley, he built a settlement, Gerakert, and gave it his own name, Gegami, which later was called Garani, after his grandson, Garnik. From his offspring, in the time of Artaxerxes, grandson G41 of Varushak, descended a certain youth named Varaz who was skillful in hunting deer, wild goats, and boars and was an accomplished marksman. Artaxerxes established Gegum as head of the royal hunt, and gifted him a cultivated area on the bank of the river which is called Hrazdan. They say that it is from him that the house of the Varajnuni descends. This Gegum, as we mentioned before, became the father of Harmati after some years, then died after living additional years. He had ordered his son Harmati to reside in Armenia. This Hayek, son of Targam, son of Tiras, son of Gomer, son of Japheth, was the ancestor of the Armenians, and these were his clans and descendants and their land of habitation. Subsequently they began, he says, to multiply and fill the country. As for Harmati, he lived some years and became the father of Aram. It is told of Aram that he performed many valiant deeds in battles and that he extended the Borders of Armenia on all sides. By his name all peoples call our land Armenia, such as the Greeks, Armenia, and the Persians and Syrians, Armenic. Now if you wish, we may set forth outside this book, or omit, Aram's complete history and his deeds of valor, how they were done, and in whose time, otherwise we shall include those accounts in this. 1 G42 13. Regarding the war and victory over the inhabitants of the East, and about the death of Nik-Ar Mades. Classical Armenian text at Internet Archive, 13. Since executing the work you ordered is more pleasant to us than eating, drinking, and carousing is to others, we have agreed to discuss briefly and in order the wars of Hayek's descendant, Aram. Aram was an industrious, patriotic individual, as the same historian reveals, and he thought it better to die for his fatherland than to see the sons of foreigners trampling the borders of his patrimony, and foreigners ruling over his genuine blood relations. This Aram, a few years before Ninus ruled over the Assyrians and Nineveh, being harassed by the peoples living around him, assembled a multitude of his own select brave men, numbering about 50,000, bowmen, powerful spearmen, young and strong, attractive of face, dexterous in battle, brave-hearted, and ready for battle. Aram encountered a group of Median youths, under the leadership of a certain Nik-Ar, called Mades, a proud and warlike man G43, at the borders of Armenia, the same historian notes. Like a robber, like the Kishans, he trampled the borders of the Armenians for 2 years with his horses' hooves and controlled them for 2 years. But suddenly, Aram came upon him before sunrise and killed the multitude of his host. He captured this same Nik-Ar, called Mades, and took him to Armenia. There, at the top of a tower of the wall, he pierced Nik-Ar's forehead with an iron nail, and ordered him to be hanged to the wall in the view of passers-by, and all who went there. Aram subjected to tribute Nik-Ar's land as far as the mountain named Zeresp, until the kingship of Ninus over Assyria and Nineveh. And so it came about that when Ninus began to rule in Nineveh, he remembered the grudge that his ancestor Bel had, having learned about it from legends. For many years, he thought about revenge, hoping to wait for a convenient time for the complete extermination of the entire tribe descended from the seed of the descendants of the valiant Hayek. However, he hid his evil intentions as he planned such actions, due to the fear and uncertainty that his own kingdom might fall into danger. And so, he ordered Aram to